Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our first meeting of the Western Region Waste Capacity Study. I am Cassidy Campbell. I'm a senior planner in the Environment and Development Department at the North Central Texas Council of Governments. To provide some background, with the support of the Resource Conservation Council, NCTCOG has initiated the study in the western portion of our region to evaluate opportunities to address future landfill capacity needs. COG has hired AZMB to complete the study in coordination with local government representatives who will serve in an advisory capacity. Mike Carlton is the lead project manager with AZMB and will be sharing information with you today about the study and next steps. Additionally, Rachel Herring with Keep Texas Recycling has also been hired as a subcontractor. I'm going to provide just a quick intro of our COG team here. I'm Cassidy Campbell, as I mentioned, a senior planner in the E&D department, and I manage the solid waste program. And my supervisor, Tamara Cook, is our senior program manager for the Environment and Development Department. And she and I, along with our colleague, Elena Berg, who is a planner in our department, will be working, we will be the main ones working on this project on COG's end. And on that note, we look forward to working with our communities and this part of the region to evaluate options and potential solutions to ensuring landfill capacity into the future to support continued growth and development that is occurring in this part of the region. Now I will turn it over to Mike and Rachel to introduce themselves. And in the meantime, if you could introduce yourselves using the chat function with your name, title, and affiliation, that would be wonderful. And again, thank you for attending this meeting today.
Thanks, Cassidy. This is Mike Carlton, and I'll be the project manager for this project. We want to thank COG for selecting us to do this important work. We look forward to working in this region of the state. It's got some very interesting history, some great resources, and definitely look forward to continuing our work that we've been doing over the last couple of years and working with local governments in the region to evaluate some potential solutions to solid waste management needs. Again, this is the North Central Texas Western Region Solid Waste Capacity Study. And, the subtext of this is to promote regional approaches to future solid waste management needs. The first thing that we'll be talking about is the project itself in part one of this presentation. And then in part two, we'll go through some of the initial data that we've collected for the first phase of this project. We've just really gotten started, but we are looking to move this thing as quickly as we can. Just some background on the project. In 2017, presented a report to the Resource Conservation Council on solid waste management capacity and doing kind of a benchmarking study of the regions of Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin. And it provided some interesting benchmark comparisons, but also looked at remaining capacity. One of the findings of that initial study that we did in-house was to identify the western region of the COG area as having some, short-term, mid-term solid waste disposal needs, more so than the rest of the region. And from that, a Western Region working group was established. It was a group from the RCC and local governments in the 8-county area that met on a periodic basis over, I think, about a 2-year period. We talked about needs, options, different types of organizational structures that could potentially work. And then from that, the RCC basically approved this formal study, which will look at this in greater detail and work towards developing some final recommendations. Cassidy had a chance to introduce their team, and we look forward to working with them. I've worked with this group over the last several years. I think we had a successful climate action workshop this year as well with the Greater Dallas Planning Council, and I appreciated their help in putting that together. Rachel, I'd like to introduce you as a member of this team as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Herring. I am the Director of Keep Texas Recycling, formerly CTRA. We are now a program of Keep Texas Beautiful, and our role on this project is to support Mike and his team, specifically in looking at regional partnerships, recycling, and some of the needs of the rural communities.
Thanks, Rachel. And your experience in putting together cooperative recycling programs, I think, will be very helpful in putting together this study. Just a real brief background on, my background is been over 35 years in the solid waste business, most of that in Texas. Been involved in landfill site selection and permitting projects, taking them from initial identifying sites through the construction of those facilities. Worked on a number of solid waste management plans, especially some of those being in this region, including Fort Worth, Arlington, Burleson, but have also done plans for regional entities where a number of local governments had to work together, which I think will come in handy as we move through this project. As Cassidy mentioned, the purpose of this project, the first phase of it is to identify waste management needs for the Western region, then identify and recommend facilities and programs to meet these needs, and also to look at ways that the local governments in this region can work together on a regional approach, which would make it much more cost-effective and gain better public support for any type of program or facility that will be needed in the future. And so our third bullet is to enhance local government cooperation in the region. This study is not a landfill or facility site selection study. We will have quite a bit of background information provided in the needs assessment report that will relate to facility options, but we are not going to be selecting a site as part of this. And it's not going to result in mandates for local governments. This is all going to be voluntary. We will have recommendations for local governments to work together, but it's going to be up to those individual local governments to decide for themselves whether they want to participate in some type of regional effort. The Western region includes Erath, Johnson, Somerville, Wise, Hood, Palo Pinto, Parker, and Tarrant counties. That's the boundaries of the study. But as you'll see when we put the needs assessment report together, there is quite a bit of COG regional data because waste isn't stagnant in this region. Waste moves both into the region and out of the region. So looking at the overall COG region is going to be an important aspect of the analysis. Key issues that we'll be examining include long-term disposal capacity, diversion opportunities through source reduction, recycling, and organics. It's not just about landfills. The impact of private sector contracts. This will be key in terms of, regional options and what cities and counties can do. Hull analysis will be part of this. Cooperative facility development, landfill closures and market impacts, as well as expansions, which there are a couple of them that are on the way. Look at different organizational structures that the local governments can work together on. And then finally look at cooperative disaster debris management as a possible option. So these are the things that we'll be studying. They'll be presented in two different technical reports. The first one of which will be the needs assessment technical report, which will be background on Western region's demographics, land use and transportation, geography, climate, and natural resources. Again, background on the region, waste generation and projections of waste generation, waste management facility inventory. Again, this won't be just for those facilities in the Western region, but we'll be looking at the broader COG region when we do that analysis of facilities, but we will be focused on the facilities in the Western region. Do a capacity analysis and a haul analysis. Those are the things that will be evaluated for that first needs assessment. One of the things that we'll be doing as part of the needs assessment, and this is where we'll need assistance from all the local governments that are in this region, is we will be doing a survey of local government programs. It's to collect data on what programs are currently being provided, who provides them, getting some information on private sector contracts and the term of those contracts. But it'll also give an opportunity for some open-ended questions that are designed to get some input into where each local government feels there's an opportunity for some type of cooperative action. Second technical report that we'll be putting together, we'll be looking at, now that you have these needs and we've identified what they are, what facilities are going to be needed to meet those needs on a long-term basis, whether they're landfills, transfer stations, or other facilities. Look at programs that can be conducted within the Western region. That's what I mean by regional approaches to either recycling, organics management, public education, disaster management, regional household hazardous waste programs. And when we talk about regional approaches, this does not necessarily mean that we're going to identify a recycling program. And because we've got 34 cities with populations over 5,000, 8 counties, that program recommendation necessarily has to be adopted by all of those 8 counties or all those 34 cities. We may be looking at sub-regional approaches to some of these programs. I know that Weatherford is looking at an organics management program, and there may be some opportunities to do that on a cooperative basis. I've had a chance to talk to folks at DFW Airport, and they're very interested in doing something on a cooperative regional basis, so that as we look at some of these potential solutions, it may be more on a sub-regional basis in some cases versus the entire region acting as one big entity. That may not rule out doing some big things on a multi county level basis. So those are the things that we'll be looking at from both the facilities and program assessment. And then we'll look at organizational options. And again, this isn't necessarily going to be one size fits every solution. We'll tie the organizational options to the complexity of the projects that are going to be implemented. For relatively simple programs, it's not necessary to form a huge organization to implement that, and one that will require a lot of legal input in terms of the structure of that organization. But we'll look at things like interlocal agreements, regional agencies, public utility participation, and possibly public-private partnerships. Just to give you some examples of agencies that we worked with in the past that deal with solid waste. Interlocal agreements, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Brazos Valley Solid Waste Management Agency, which is College Station and Bryan. It was initially set up for those two local governments to work together to basically close one of their landfills and rely on just one facility for those two communities because it made more economic sense to do that. And they were able to do that through an interlocal agreement to set up that agency. Regional agencies, you have the group up in Tazewell, where you've got a number of cities and counties that have gotten together and formed an agency to manage its solid waste. Public utilities role can be, an example of that is the North Texas Municipal Water District and the way that it manages waste for several local governments in the Collin County area. That's an example of that. And you've already got examples of public-private partnerships in this region where you have cities that own facilities, but the private sector actually operates them. And so we'll look at those different options and again, consider the program, the level of complexity with what those organizational recommendations will be. Input from local governments is going to be very important in terms of how we present this. As part of our scope, there'll be a number of one-on-one interviews with representatives of some of the major local governments and counties in the region. So you'll have a chance to talk to me, on a one-on-one basis to give me your ideas and express some of your concerns about where this is headed. Limitations of the study. Again, just want to emphasize it's not a facility selection study, no mandates. It is going to be real important for us to get the surveys responded to. As far as the in-person meetings, we'll have to work that out given COVID and whether that needs to be an extended phone call or if you're comfortable having me come and visit under however we want to deal with this, but I'm open to working with you however you're comfortable in doing that. Project outcomes. Again, it's giving you a better understanding of waste management needs in this region, as well as a clear understanding of how waste can be managed in the Western region in the future, and try and get to be able to do that in a cooperative manner. So that's what we hope to get out of this. And I think that given the last 2 years when we've talked to local governments about this issue and some of the options that we've discussed, there's a real possibility that something is going to come out of this that will have a lasting impact on this region. The organization for the project, one of the things that we recommended is that we establish what's called a policy advisory group for the project, and this would include representatives of some of the major cities and all of the counties to have an individual as part of this advisory group. And its purpose is to provide QA/QC through this process, input on some specific recommendations, and to assist in communications with our group and the rest of the region. Given the fact that we'll have all the counties participating, it does provide representation for the entire region through this policy advisory group. And looking forward to having them meet probably in the first part of September. One of the first things that we'll want the policy advisory group to do is to take a look at the draft survey that we've developed and provide some comments and recommendations on that before it goes out to all local governments. And then all local governments in the Western region, we'll be presenting draft reports that come out of this project. We'll want your review and comments, and then to assist in responding to the survey, and then communicate with your city or county management, elected officials, to let them know what's going on, what some of the recommendations are, and again, kind of a communication link between our project and elected officials. Project schedule. In August, we'll complete a communications plan that will be distributed to the COG as well as to the local governments. We'll make that available online. The survey, preparing it in August, September, having that go out. And then by October, having the needs assessment drafted and ready for review by the Policy Advisory Group and the COG. Then we'll move on to the technical and organizational options. And again, final recommendations sometime in April. At this point, I'd like to open it up to discussion and comment. I'm real interested in what everyone's both interest in this project is and what they would like to see as outcomes come out of this, based on what we've done over the last couple of years and where this project specifically is headed. And Cassidy, I'll let you kind of be the traffic cop on.
If anyone has a question, if you don't want to jump in and maybe talk over each other, there's a little raise hand button that you can select, and that'll let us know that you have a question and would like to speak, and then we can call on people. And then also we do have some questions in the chat box. So I will go ahead and fill those questions.
Okay.
Got a question that says, when will the PAC be finalized? Will there be a formal process to nominate and or select the PAC members?
We have provided a list of recommendations, and letters will be going out to that group of individuals, working with the COG to get that committee finalized and formalized right now. Again, we're looking at several of the major cities and all of the counties. We wanted to make sure that every group within the region had some representation to the Policy Advisory Group.
Okay, another question is, when should the surveys be expected?
Probably sometime around the second week of September or so.
I am not seeing any further questions right at this moment.
Okay, does anyone want to provide some thoughts in terms of what you're hoping, what the best outcome of this study would be?
And we actually did get another question. How many members will be part of the PAC?
I can't remember the specific number, but it's probably going to be somewhere around 16 or so.
And then a follow-up to that is, are the commercial carriers involved in this process, and will they have a seat on the PAC?
They won't have a seat on the Policy Advisory Group. We will be talking to them, obviously, as we're doing our data collection, to make sure that we've got up-to-date information on the status of their facilities. The issue of the commercial haulers in the region is going to be probably one of the more critical elements of moving forward in terms of developing some type of regional option, in terms of how much flexibility they have in determining where waste goes and how it's picked up. So that is going to be a pretty critical aspect of the study, looking at that market.
Hey, Mike, this is Brian
Yes.
Berners, City of Denton.
Yes, Brian.
One of the things that you had talked about earlier was, we've divided the area into eastern and western regions. But at the City of Denton, we are getting a lot of waste that's coming in from several of these western counties, both by direct haul, contracts we have with certain agencies, as well as contracts we have with private companies.
Right.
How will you be interacting with some of these facilities, on the eastern side to more fully understand the waste transportation dynamic that's involved with this? Because right now, based on everything I've heard, you're focusing your committees and everything else on these western counties, and Denton County is I guess technically considered an eastern county for the purposes of this study.
It is, but we recognize that waste is moving both ways. There's waste coming in to the western region from counties on the eastern side, as well as a lot of waste going out. And looking at the MSW annual reports from each one of the landfills, some of the waste from the western region is actually going all the way out to Hunt County. And that's largely driven by, who's got the hauling contract and how are they related to a specific landfill. So, yeah, we'll be having conversations with each one of the landfills and trying to get a sense of what percentage of waste is coming in from the western region. But as I mentioned, our focus is on the western region. However, we can't ignore what's going on region-wide because waste is moving across these borders. So, Brian, you can expect a follow-up call from me. I'll also be talking to Dallas and the privates as well.
Thank you.
Well, that's, where we are in terms of the project itself. I'll quickly run through some of the background information. I wish this was in a conference room over a couple of maps instead of charts and tables, because it's a lot more interesting that way. But this will give you a sense of some of the issues that we're dealing with and some of the numbers that we've collected so far. As we mentioned, the region's the 8 counties, and it covers a fairly large chunk of, the land mass. It's almost half of the overall COG region and represents about 33% of the region's population. One of the things that Brian and I were just talking about is the fact that, while we be focused on these 8 counties, you can't ignore what's happening outside this region in terms of disposal capacity, because waste is going out. I think when I looked at the landfill data that was reported to TCEQ, Terrence County's waste is going to 12 different landfills. So it is getting spread out quite a bit. And some of the waste that is being brought in as far as Cook County into the western region. So it is something we'll be focused on the western region, but can't ignore what's going on. Population projections. Currently, the western region has a population of about 2.6 million people out of a total COG population of 7.8. By 2040, we're looking at primarily about a 20-year time frame on this. That population reaches 3.5 million, and that's going to have significant impact on how much waste is being generated and the remaining capacity of those facilities. Looked at housing characteristics. Single-family households for this region, 70%, according to U.S. Census Data Center, which is, I would say, considerably higher than other regions in terms of single versus multifamily households. We do see a trend where multifamily will take a higher percentage in the future, and that's going to have an impact on your collection programs, your recycling efforts, and the types of waste that are being generated. And then we've distributed this, the housing data by each one of the counties. One of the things that you'll see when you see the needs assessment report is we'll have data both for each individual county as well as the region as a whole. Total employment is 1.06 million. And again, we'll do this by county level. We know that historically, the commercial industrial sectors account for about 2/3 of the waste stream. So this sector can't be ignored in terms of the analysis that we do, and in terms of having them be a participant in this program. Again, I was glad to see DFW wanting to participate in this, and I would say that we'll also be identifying some of the major institutions in this region that could be participants in any kind of cooperative effort. Land use, another thing that we're looking at, largest category that was identified, and this is through COG's GIS program. About 64% is listed as vacant, and that would be including some of the agricultural uses of that land. And we'll be providing a lot more detail in terms of airports, transportation systems, natural resources such as oil and gas in the region, and major water resources in the Western region. As far as the waste management characteristics, again, this region is highly dependent on the private sector for collection and disposal services. Very few municipalities provide direct collection service in this region. It's just a handful. The key are the landfill situation. The two major landfills, Arlington and Fort Worth, publicly owned, privately operated. Turkey Creek would be the other major landfill, which is both privately owned and privately operated. And then some other facilities, Cleburne, Stephenville, public and public operation. Weatherford is privately owned, privately operated. Again, and the other thing that complicates this, and something that we'll work towards trying to identify ways to bring local governments together, is the fact that each one of cities and counties has its own recycling and public education programs. There may be some opportunities to do this on kind of a joint basis to improve some of the efficiencies. Solid waste collection services, again, private's having a huge role in this. One of the things I did was gone through each one of your websites and looked at who's currently providing solid waste services, and then based on population, did a preliminary assessment of how the collection market breaks down in terms of haulers for this region. Ultimately, I'd like to do this on households, and this is one of the reasons why I want to get that information from the surveys. But you can see that you've got three primary hauling firms in this region: Republic, Waste Management, and Community Waste Disposal account for a majority of that collection service. It's estimated that there's about 2.3 million tons of waste generated in the Western region. Again, based on historic data, about 2/3 of this is going to be from commercial industrial sources. The way that I got that 2.3 million was to look at the COGS. And again, this is based on disposal rates, but they tie pretty closely, is what that per capita disposal rate was, and applied it to Western region's population to get this 2.3 million tons, which compares to the disposal quantities for the region, which is 2.8 million. But factors that are going to influence future generation include population and economic growth, increased recycling and source reduction efforts, future storm events. We will look at historic storm events and what impact they've had on the waste stream, greater urbanization, in the Western region. COVID-19, I'm showing that that has a negative impact on waste generation. While it has increased the residential waste stream, is what we're hearing from reports, it's reduced the amount of commercial industrial waste that's being generated and collected. And then finally, waste imports and exports. Again, that's going to depend on the availability of facilities in the Western region and how privates determine where waste is going to flow. One of the big impacts in terms of not so much generation in the Western region, but the fact that the DFW landfill in the next couple of years is expected to close. That facility had been handling about 1 million tons in a 10 million ton North Central Texas Council of Governments region. That waste may or may not make it to the Western region, but it'll have an impact on capacity at a number of facilities that are taking Western region waste. As we look at population growth, you can see that waste generation could go from about 3 million tons right now to above 5 million tons. The three lines look at different generation rates based on historic numbers. It's interesting to note that in 2010, the per capita disposal rate was 6.5 pounds per capita. And in 2018, we've increased that to 7.5. We would hope that because of the increased recycling efforts and consciousness of waste being a big issue, that number would go down, but it has actually gone up fairly significantly from 2010. Hopefully in the future we can see that drop, but we have provided ranges of what that future generation disposal numbers may look like. When we look at cumulative waste generation, what we've done is looked at how much waste is going to be generated cumulatively over the next 30 years based on population projections. And looking at the Western region's current disposal capacity, which is 63 million tons, you can see because of that growth rate where you may see our current capacity somewhere between 25 and 30 years drop down to about 16 years. Now, the one thing that's not factored into this graph is that we know that Turkey Creek is going to get an expansion, and that will increase capacity somewhat. But when you look at the overall regions, the Western region's continued growth in waste generation, that'll add a couple of years, not a significant number of years. You know, landfill capacity has definitely been one of the drivers for doing this study. When you look at the growth, we've mentioned it's 15 to 20 years of remaining capacity. The time required to secure new capacity is somewhere between 10 and 15 years. That's taking it from site selection, permitting, construction of that facility, and getting it operational. When I first came to Texas, one of my first jobs was to do a landfill site selection project in Lubbock, and did Lubbock, Corpus, and Bavisma. Fortunately, I did those projects well before social media came along, because to get one of these facilities permitted these days, it's significantly more difficult than it used to be, because social media has become such a big influence on the ability, or the ability to potentially stop these permits from moving forward or making them much more difficult. The other thing that I'll point out is I'm working on the City of Houston's solid waste plan, and we had somebody from Republic on our advisory task force and brought up the issue of, is it easier for the public sector or the private sector to select a new facility and move that forward? And he didn't pause when he said that it's actually a lot easier for the public sector to move these type of facilities forward than it is for the private sector. That's not to say it's going to be easy. It's just that the the public sector hasn't much. It is better suited to move that forward. As I mentioned, there's some significant changes that are taking place in the COG region that are going to affect capacity available to the Western region. Weatherford's got approximately 1 to 2 years remaining capacity. I know they're looking at their situation very carefully right now and what their future looks like. I mentioned DFW closing sometime in the future. Denton's expansion is on the way. Brian, do you want to mention where you're at in terms of your permit application and what additional capacity that'll bring?
No, I am, we had a public meeting on the 25th, and it went well. We had about 30 folks online that provided comment, and then we had several people provide written comment afterwards. We had significant fight put up by a local environmental organization, but again, we don't believe that they've raised anything which would cause any detriment to our permit application. We anticipate that the commission will submit its response to comment within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then hopefully after about a 45 day cooling off period, it'll be sent to the commissioners, and we'll have some movement on the award of the permit. So, you know, that's just speculation at this point, but hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have our permit in hand.
How many tons of capacity does that add to your facility?
Depending on how high we go, it adds anywhere from about 40 to 90 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know that you're seeing quite a bit of additional waste already because of what's happening at DFW.
Oh yeah, you know, I think, you know, DFW basically they've internalized all their waste and really raised their gate rates. So, you know, while they had a significant amount going there, and there's still a significant amount of waste management volume going there, all the private waste that was going there has already been diverted somewhere else. We're seeing a significant volume increase. We're doing close to 2,000 ton a day right now through the gate.
Okay, and that's compare that to last year's throughput.
Yeah, last year we were anywhere from about 1,100, 1,200 ton.
Okay, thanks. We mentioned Turkey Creek. There's a Fort Worth C&D landfill that's seeking an expansion right now. And Malloy landfill is seeking a major permit amendment that was submitted in 2019. Malloy is in Hunt County, but as I mentioned, some of the waste from Wise County, I believe, is going to that facility. One of the things that I did, and it was just a quick analysis, and just to provide some sense of where the Western region is compared to the rest of the COG. And what I did was establish some disposal subregions. We did split this up into 5, call them waste subsheds, or however you want to do it, but looked at capacity for these different regions just to provide you with a sense of where the Western region is compared to some of the other areas of the COG. You see that 63 million tons of capacity out of a total of 380 are in the Western region. The disposal quantities, 2.8 million tons out of 10 million tons in the overall region. And, you know, we've got 8 counties in the Western region. The Denton-Lewisville shed basically is Denton County primarily, and that's got about 2.5 million tons. The Dallas area disposes of almost half of the region. Northeast is primarily the North Texas Municipal Water District's landfill, but some of Malloy's. And the Southeast region is just the city of Corsicana's landfill. This provides some numbers in terms of the landfills in the Western region, the 2019 disposal tons. This data comes from the annual reports for 2019, which is what the TCEQ uses to prepare its annual summary reports. And if any of these numbers are different than what you're seeing from your own facilities, please send me an email or give me a call to talk about this in terms of any changes that may have taken place. Looked at the capacity, and these are in years based on the annual reports that were submitted. And when you look at capacity based on current disposal rates, it gives about 20 to 25 years of capacity in the region. But when you consider the growth that's taking place, that actually drops to 15 to 20 years. And again, you're looking at a 10 to 15 year time frame to get new capacity online. Finally, what we did was, and you'll see this in the needs assessment report, is to look at the different facilities in the region, whether they're transfer stations. I looked at recycling facilities. These would be registered or some type of permit associated with them, or a notice that's on file with the TCEQ. In addition to this, there are a huge number of recycling businesses that operate within the region that are doing a lot of recycling. When you look at the state's report, I think the average recycling rate on a statewide basis is approximately 23%. And that includes both recycling and organics facilities, construction, demolition, recycling, et cetera. But we'll basically inventory not just landfills, but any of these other facilities and the citizen convenience stations that are located throughout the region. Again, one of the things that we identified when we did the last analysis is that transfer stations are likely to play a lot bigger role in managing waste in this region in the future, and that's something we'll look at as part of the Hall analysis.
Hey, Mike, real quick, I see Robert Smouse has his hand raised. It might be
Sure.
relevant, might be a relevant question for right now.
Sure, Robert.
Hey, Mike and everybody. The transfer station slide, have you or have those sites been validated that they're still in operation? The one that jumped out at me was tons that the Southwest paper stock transfer, is that 25,000 tons of recycling or is that MSW?
It's reported as MSW, but I'll have to clarify that in terms of what those tons are. Those are tons reported to TCEQ coming out of that transfer station. They may not have distinguished between whether it's recyclable or solid waste, but that's something to follow up on.
Yeah, that's the total volume that they're reporting
Right.
within the annual report. Okay.
Yeah.
I think and some of these it may, that if they're a dual type of site, so if you can be able to break those out between what's actually true MSW and what is recycling.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And that's something we do we do break down the landfill data to look at not just waste disposed, but waste that's being recovered and treated. So that data will be in there as well. But that's good input. And then finally, as I mentioned, we're not going to identify a site, but we are going to have information in the needs assessment report providing some background information in the region that relates to some of these site selection issues to provide you with some type of perspective on future facilities. At this point, any further questions, comments on some of the initial data that we've collected and how we were approaching waste projections and what the needs for this Western region are? Go ahead, Robert.
Sorry, the slide right before that, as far as I know, the project funding aspect, we can't identify a site, but is the project going to at least get to the point to say basically on all this information, if one single site is looked at or promoted, what the site size may need to be, you know,
Yes.
how large of a site, and okay, well, if we don't have one site, but, you know, potentially 2 regional sites or 2 or 3 different sites to cover the entire, you know, 8-county region, what the size of the sites would need to be. So,
Yes.
got it. Good, thank you.
And, you know, that won't come in this first needs assessment report. That'll be in the report. We start getting into, you know, some of the options and,
Yep.
and solutions. But,
Great.
you know, these days, given the opposition to any facilities, you are going to be looking at a fairly large tract of land, anywhere from 600 to 1,000 plus acres for a facility. I know that I think Bavisma's landfill is about 600 acres. Lubbock's is 1,200. Corpus is 2,200 acres. So we are looking at fairly large tracts. And then, you know, we can look at the possibility of, you know, not just one facility, but a couple of facilities to meet the needs.
Can you go back a slide? One other question. Sorry, I'm raising my hand, but also talking.
No, but
So-
I can't see your hand, so
okay,
keep
Tamara,
talking.
Cassidy, y'all need to rein me in.
This is perfect.
So on that list, again, we can't identify a site, but based on that information, when you get to that second half of the project, to be able to say, okay, we're going to need, you know, 600 acres or 1,200 acres, whatever that size, would you guys look at the counties that are involved to reasonably say, you know, if it's 800 acres, you know, these counties either have to be involved to approve the type of site, or reasonably have a geographical area that would even accommodate that type of site? Or is that getting too far into the site selection, site identification process?
There's going to have to be a discussion about being able to work together to essentially allow for sites to be located in any given county. And that's going to be, you know, one of the discussions we'll have in this process. There have been counties that have established, you know, site ordinances, and we'll be looking at which ones do and don't. But that's going to be part of one of the issues that you'll have to negotiate through.
Yeah, making the sausage.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
You know, probably the closest that I've worked with that gets through that process was doing the site selection for the Tazewell landfill, which included Gainesville, Sherman, Denison, Cook, and Grayson counties. You know, they established a group that worked together through that site selection process. And then when the site was identified, the participating or the community nearest it became part of that group, you know, and basically had a voice as they went through the permitting process for that facility. So that's kind of a model of how that gets accomplished on a multi-local government basis. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Mike, we have another one. Are there any anticipated funding mechanisms identified to support implementation of the recommendations that come out of the report?
We will look at that. Again, that'll come more in the second report, not the needs assessment report, but that's a good point. We'll look at that and look at how not just funding sources, but how other multi-government programs or facilities have been funded and how they've done that. You know, so our next steps in this is we'll have a communications plan that we'll present to the COG and the policy advisory group that will include the draft survey, and also to get into a little more detail on the needs assessment technical report. If there's any additional comments on that, we'll prepare that and present that technical report to all the local governments that are in the region or have an interest in it. And then finally prepare the options report as the next step in this process. And here is contact information for myself, for Cassidy. Please, feel free to give me a call. Send me an email if you've got questions or need clarification on what we're doing. Expect that I'll be reaching out to most of you to talk about your individual situation and what your thoughts are on this study and the process. And again, I want to thank COG and all the local governments that are participating in this study to be a participant in this. I think it's got some great opportunities to solve some long-term issues that are facing the Western region.
Hey, thanks, Mike. We actually have another question.
Sure.
Is the focus on only the identification and construction of a multi-area facility, or is there a consideration for expansion of existing individual facilities?
We'll look at expansions. We'll have conversations with landfill owners to see if, that's something that they're considering and what potential impact that could have on capacity. So yeah, we'll be looking at expansions besides just new facilities. We won't design them, but we'll look at possibility of expanding them. Any other questions? Tamara, Cassidy, you have the final word.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions and for participation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.